All right, here we are again for another episode of Short Fiction Side Hustle. This is number 9,
Ooh.
and I am once again joined by my good friends Chris and Vasha. And I will put a link to their channels below, and you can check out their stuff because it's pretty awesome. So, um, with that said, this month we are looking at another novella length type story from Donaldson's Reave the Just and Other Tales. And we read The Woman Who Loved Pigs. Um, a very
It's,
enticing title, I would say,
yeah,
right?
a little more romantic than Varsha's attempt at what it was called yesterday, which was the woman who killed pigs. Uh,
Oh, yes. Yeah.
The woman who killed pigs. Yes, that does make for a more. Nope, it's just a more default story than who
that's
loved
right.
pigs.
Yeah. And so
Um,
I was looking up this one, and it was actually first published in this magazine here, Full Spectrum
oh,
anthology series. In 1993, it was published in this science fiction anthology series, and I found that pretty interesting. I'd never heard of this series before, so I was like, "Oh wow, that's cool." And so this was then reprinted in this volume in 1999. So little history there. So that's pretty cool.
interesting.
But to the story itself, a nice 70-page novella, and this is probably one of my favorites so far in this anthology. Um, Tough to pick a favorite, but this one was pretty good. I gotta say, I liked it a lot. I don't know how you guys feel, but I had a great time reading this story. So let's get some high level thoughts there, Vasha. What do you say?
So, I've been looking forward to the story from when we started this series because of the title. No other reason, just the
Yeah.
title. And I wasn't expecting to like it. I was just looking forward to see what the story is about. And I love the story. And yeah, like you, I think this could be one of my favorites. Maybe the favorite story from
Oh,
this
yeah.
collection. But
Mm.
so good. I love it. And so I think for all the other stories, I don't know if it's the underlying thread that Donaldson intended, but you could sort of answer the question of what is this about and get like one answer or one and a half answer, so to speak. With this one, it's not so much what is this about as all the questions it raises and all the places where the questions it raises apply. And that made it that much more brilliant. Like just the story in and of itself was great. But the I guess themes that underlie it, the questions that we start to ask because of it,
Mm.
make it so much more brilliant. So, yeah, I love the story.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. I agree. There's a lot of depth, I think, to this story, and a lot of, like you said, questions that can come out of it that you can ask about all the situations that this story could apply to, and what happens in this story. Everything that happens in the story brings up that questions just about life in general. Like one thing leads to another. I think was one of the biggest themes I got out of it, because it must. And I'm like, that is the part of the essence of her character, Fern's character, and part of the theme of the story too. And it all ties together, as we'll see here. And Chris, what did you think of it?
So I think this story kind of highlights the importance of getting a really good name for your short story, because I think from the outset, as you sort of alluded to, Varsha, it has a ring to it and stands out immediately. So when you go into this story like this, and especially in a collection, I think like Grieve the Just, where you really don't know what type of story you're ever going to get, like what type of world you're going into, what kind of place you're going to go into, what the character's going to like, kind of where it sits within the fantasy genre, it sort of carries you through the first section, especially when it literally seems like it's what it professes to be, which is just a story of a woman who loves pigs above all else things. But as classically goes, and it has went for this entire short story collection, it sort of subverts that expectation as well, because it's not just simply about that at all. And as opposed to most of the other stories in here, I think it's actually quite obvious where it's going. Once the story sort of reveals itself, I think you know where it's going, but it doesn't actually take away from its power, I think, at any stage, because the reckoning and the discussion of good versus evil, which has been through this quite a bit, the dark and light that's been in some of the other stories, again is resolves in a really, really interesting way. This kind of awareness of people who think they're good and people who think they're evil, and how that kind of plays in society or in things at large, and how people get treated. The only thing that I dislike about it is the last paragraph. It's the only
okay.
thing. It's
Yeah.
the only thing I dislike about it is the final resolution of it. In some ways, it's the only thing that gives me pause. I just wish it hadn't done that, because again, it's a bit tropey and a bit on the nose, I think, maybe for that type of story. But I mean, it's also Donaldson sort of playing with the ideas that he set up within the story. I mean, it in some ways it's always the obvious resolution of the story of how it would play out, because he's given us previous for it. But aside from that, great story.
Interesting. I found that interesting because you say the the last paragraph is the one that the that it has that little tease,
Yes,
basically, that
indeed.
maybe this wizard is now
Yes,
in
indeed.
Fern.
In Fern, yeah.
But right before that, we get we get this sentence: by slow degrees, the present became so like the past that men and women shook their heads incredulously to think that continuity had ever been disturbed.
Hmm.
And like, has there been any change, was the question that popped into my head when that line came out. And so that last paragraph, you go back and you see he gives you this little hint that our friend Ciramon, or whatever his name is, might not be quite as gone as we thought.
Yeah.
Or is that just a change in Fern?
Fern, yeah.
And it leaves that question up in the air, I think. And so that I thought the lines previously were important to denote how, because this was a story of change, and is change good and is change not good, because that's what the people who come to the village, the soldiers or whatever, the prince, and they're like, did anything change? As if, and when they finally, when they came back and they realized something did, even though the villagers didn't tell them, change is bad. But because it leads to conflict. And so I just loved how it all played out, and especially in that medieval setting where the change didn't happen. Like, in the Middle Ages, change did not happen at all. And when change did happen, it usually was something very bad. Somebody was invading or something, something like that. And so that is, I just loved how he played with that concept.
Mm-hmm. No, it definitely has. I mean, like you say, that sort of theme of change that they talk about, kind of little markers through it. Again, this change of her, she sees about the change in herself. Actually, she sees herself being subverted and changed in ways that she doesn't feel she can control, but also it still is her in some ways, and that people's influence on others, and then coming back all the way around to say whether it's going to change. I I just didn't feel like it was needed in the story, if that makes sense. I don't feel, maybe he was trying to tie it together and give it some proper resolution that links to the previous themes, but I sort of felt like that sort of simpler life that Fern kind of reverted, and the people treated her differently. They changed how they treated her, was actually for me much more of a satisfying resolution, if that makes sense, rather than where it ended up. But yes, I mean, that's very personal to me. Like I that's just the way that I felt about it.
Yeah. And Vasha, what do you think?
Yeah, I think about the ending specifically. Yeah, I also had a moment of I don't know if I like that, because I get why that ending would work if if it was a cliffhanger to a continuing story, right? Then we see how this plays out. But I feel like we already got our resolution with everything that happened with Fun and her going back to the way that she was by choice, which that's the part that stuck with me here. The thing about willingness, and how Suriman, is that his name, feels like he's basically, what he's doing with the women is putting a bit of himself in them, because they're not clever by themselves. They're clever in the way that he thinks that he wants them to be, and he is giving them his cleverness essentially. So he's just basically making clones of himself in these other women, and they're not happy about it. They detect that and they're not happy about it. Okay, now as I'm speaking, I think I'm talking myself into that ending. And so, and I guess, okay, so that's what he
Careful.
did in the end.
You can subvert your own expectations here.
Yeah.
He is now in Fun, right? Maybe, okay, maybe that's sort of the image version of what happened before. Okay, now that I think about it that way, I like it. But before, I was thinking of it as just a shock thing that, oh no, he's still around. Like, I don't care about that. I don't care about the fact that he's alive, because that part played a very small role in my enjoyment of the story, the mechanics around the wizard stuff. So ending it on that note, wasn't too happy about it. But as a what's the word I'm looking for? As a piece of imagery around what happened before with the mental stuff, I think this works, because this is not great. So the stuff that happened before is of a similar vein. It just feels like it's more acceptable, because hey, he's turning half-wits into smart women, but they're not happy about it. But he is essentially putting his intellect in them and controlling them through that. So it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah. So that brings up questions, of course, which comes up on a lot of the fiction we read, is this question of free will and people controlling other people. And we read that a lot, of course, in Wars of Light and Shadow. We read that in some other stuff too. And this pig, who we first called Titus, comes in, and of course, when the pig's talking to you, talking to her in her mind, something's up, and there's something special about this pig. And as it goes on, he's giving her instruction. He's telling her how to do things. He's giving her the means for speech, which she didn't have previously. And he's also insisting she do things that were against what her nature of what she was doing before, which scares her. And you wonder at what point was he enforcing his will upon her to the point where she couldn't refuse. And what point did that happen? Because he seemed really, it was really nice at first, right? Because she found this pig. She didn't own one. Like that was like the first
Hmm.
sentence.
That's
Fern
right.
loved pigs, but she didn't own one. That was like, and so all of a sudden it's like this found friendship. This, oh, I have a pig now. This is great. And the pig's snuggling up to her, and and it makes you kind of want to root for this relationship, and and have good things happen. And then and then of course it seems like he's invading her dreams um a little bit with this silver eye and stuff. And from there it just escalates into control of another person, and the
Yeah.
parallel's wonderful there.
Yeah, because she does save him originally, and through her, like she through half wit or whatever way you want to call her or label her or whatever she is, her caring nature is enough to save the pig's life, in its
Yeah.
own right. And the problem comes that Suleiman, it's not it's not going to change quickly enough for him to kind of be able to save himself, he thinks, long term or otherwise. But actually, for me, the interesting part of that is it's in his desire to affect change that he brings notice to himself. If it had have done it at a much slower pace, then actually he might never have revealed himself in that way. If he'd have done it at a much slower pace with the kids and changing Fern much, much, much more slowly and bringing her on, then actually things could have been very different for him. And it was actually his impatience that actually is the bit that brought him out.
Yeah, and that is great because it's a it's a reaffirmation of power bringing its own downfall.
Yes.
When we saw in the flashback where that the older kids overheard and told to them that that was also how he fell before, because he was trying to manipulate and he's trying to create power in a place that and his experiment failed, and he got all the wizards turned, all the other sorcerers turned against him. And so that was you're exactly right. His impatience and his planning brought the attention that he didn't want. And it's just so it just speaks to, I guess, fate kind of karma, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You're you're doing something to control somebody else, and that brings attention, brings repentance, or brings uh the opposite down of what you want on you.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the consequences were
Consequences.
of his actions were wrought by himself and not actually by um what he was actually thought he was doing, as you're quite right to say, that he was sort of working against himself, and he
Right.
didn't learn the lessons, as you say, of his previous mistakes, and the things that he did. Because I think one of the really interesting questions for me again about this is that I don't think, regardless of how he's painted or otherwise, that he's wholly bad. I think he needs to watch Me Too. A bit of toxic masculinity here, insofar as like his hubris and his ego tells him that he is right and smarter than everybody else, but actually he is lacking that bit of humanity that if he had been watching Fern, for instance, that he would have been able to glean and actually improve him. If he had let her influence him more, then he actually would have been much better off, and his understanding of his life and stuff might have been much better.
Yeah, and that seemed to be the case in his previous
Yeah.
occupation as well. It seemed to be the same mistake, and there goes that lack of change once again.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess the fact that it ended the way it did sort of makes it so he didn't learn anything. Before, he told himself, I think, that he did what was better for the princess than everyone else thought, and yet he was being persecuted wrongly. But now they both told him explicitly that we are not happy with what you did to us, and still he hasn't changed, he hasn't learned. But on the subject of toxic masculinity, I talked before about all the places this could apply. Right, this is the whole question of choice and the question of molding from from within, I guess, like molding to suit your taste or your preferences. I think that that could be metaphorical for so many things, like in, for instance, a patriarchal society, or like any powerful person molding less powerful people to their wish. But also, I think what's interesting about this whole situation is, from the outside it looks like Fun is really being benefited from her interactions with the pig, right?
Hmm.
That she's got more food, she's more well respected all around the town. Everybody loves and admires her now that she's able to heal all of them. But she has this niggling notion that this is not because of her. It's not her who's doing the healing. She's not earning the food that she's getting. She's not earning the gifts, and so on and so forth. So
Mm.
the disconnect there, I think, was quite brilliant, because she was destitute. She was, finding food in scraps on the refuse heap. And again, from the outside, that looks really bad, but she was fine. She was comfortable living like that, and she had dignity, going back to that introduction that Donaldson wrote to this collection, where he wanted to give his characters dignity. I think her dignity was in doing what she wanted without,
Mm.
being a beggar, without being forced mentally to do things that she did not want to. And so I think that was very powerful. The things that in our world look bad, but people might actually be happy, and then you try to force them to do something they don't want to, and you think you're doing better for them, but they're not happy about it. Yeah, I yeah, that
Yeah,
whole
Hmm.
disconnect was quite brilliantly done.
yeah. I'm gonna be charitable to you whether you like it or not, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. She owned a pig and she was happy. Only her lack of self-consciousness prevented her from knowing that she was happy.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
in some ways, like all she wanted was a pig at the start of the story.
yeah.
That's all she really wanted. That was her dream, to have a pig somebody can call her own, and just to love it, because
Mm,
she loved the snuggles of it. She
yeah.
loved caring for it. As she points out at the very start, and other people point out now, if she had a pig, she would feed the pig instead of herself, which
Mm,
says an awful lot about who she is as a person,
yeah.
Yeah,
and
right.
what she's got going for in herself. And that actually is how it sort of turned out. And it sort of felt like at the start, like the pig was returning her good nature and helping her in some ways. But
That went
after,
south pretty
yeah,
quickly.
after that initial bit where the help came, it became them begging and stealing and coercing, which is was very much not in her nature.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting.
She
Yeah.
so sort of vague theory time, and it has no consequence to the story, I don't think, but I want to discuss anyway. The fact that she lost her affection for pigs after the uh events transpired. Well, I suppose part of it could be that Suriman is living inside her head now. But I was wondering if this means that, how she instinctually knew how to take care of kids, and that almost had
Mhm.
the nature of the images that the pig who adopted her had kept planting in her head, which was, there right from the beginning, except for the first time she took care of him. I think everything else, the pig kept giving images for her. I was wondering if, the pig was just in the general vicinity, and he groomed this woman for affection of pig, so that when he's in trouble he can show up to her and make her take care of him. But yeah, that's pretty far-fetched, and like it doesn't really matter either way. But I was curious about why she lost her affection for pigs and what that means.
Mm.
That's a good question.
Well, for me, it could be just the simple fact that the thing that she liked about pigs is that they were unassuming and sort of
Mm,
had a simple life and all of that. I think the allegory can be made that
mm,
she's seen pigs as having a life similar to her own in a lot of
mm,
ways, and that actually her relationship with Titus Sermon, as it was, actually changed that relationship that she had of with pigs in general.
mm,
To say that actually she felt controlled by it, and actually there was no relatable kind of thing between her, which is sort of the same thing as saying, she had a bad experience in relationships and all of that kind
Yeah.
of stuff, that kind of thing. But the reasons for her liking pigs, I think, are very much born in the fact that they had similar existence. She was written through for food, people's leftovers. She wasn't asking them for it. She was literally just kind of going through and taking what she could for herself at that stage that people disposed with. And just sort of seen a similarity
Mm.
in the common pig.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. That's a great point.
Oh
I
yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
that's true.
I like that a lot more than my theory because that doesn't make a lot of sense anyway. This is nice. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. I mean, it's cool because in a lot of ways you can kind of understand where Sermon's coming from because who wants to live as a pig when you were a wizard first of all, right? And at first, of course, we don't know his backstory and we don't know um, who he is, and you like this pig needed help. This pig is conscious now, which was a surprise of a sorts, not unexpected because it is a fantasy story. So,
Yes, indeed.
um, but um, and he then gets a little bossy with her. Basically, he's after she helps him, and then he helps her a little bit. He gets a little bossy and gets more forceful, and but he also shows his frustration with her understanding and how slow it's coming along, which is completely an understandable trait when somebody's trapped in the form of a pig and wants to get
Yes.
out and something's coming that he's not going to like. So there's a lot of nuance to the pig to Saruman's character
Definitely.
that you can definitely see his side of the story. And it's only when it gets told by other people and pointed out by other people that you start to see, oh, things aren't quite what they seem with what this pig's saying. And that viewpoint into the other side, which comes through the children that he manipulated, is I think just a brilliant use of the whole the structure of the story and stuff like that. I thought it was really great.
Yeah, right to the very end, he still hasn't learned the lesson. He still doesn't know really what he's done wrong, other than these people are out to get him in some
Yeah,
ways.
and the real Titus is kind of a jerk too.
Yes, exactly. That's kind of the thing. Like, and again, this idea of good versus bad, it doesn't actually seem that they're in the right. In some ways, he's clinging to power. He's power hungry as well as anything else. The only real victim seems to be this young woman. And the question comes then: was she that innocent? Because the effect that Cernan had on him is not the effect that he had on Fern. Maybe it was over a longer time or something. In theory, Fern should be yearning after Cernan or the pig or whoever we're going to call him exactly. But we get into her head as this is all happening, and we find out that she doesn't like what the pig's doing there. Like she is not having that effect is not having her. So it does sort of raise the question as to whether it was all Cerman's fault what happened to this woman. In some ways, this yearning and longing that she had for him, was it part of his influence on her, or was it the fact that she was kind of taken in by him in a certain way, but couldn't? Everybody else in the rear going, he's bad, he's bad, he's bad, he's bad. So again, that's not totally clear within the story, but we know very much from what Fern's perspective was, which was this pig is making me steal, it's making me go against my nature and that kind of thing, which is not what we get from the other side of the story, which we don't see their perspective.
Yeah, nicely said, because it begs the question of because we know a lot about Fern's character and who she is, We don't know a lot about the other, the was it the
Young lady.
princess?
Yeah.
Yeah, and other than the backstory that we get through,
Which is
through
second, third hand
secondhand,
information.
third
Yeah.
hand. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so we don't know if she was already predisposed to be possessive towards somebody who helped her out in a certain situation and then felt spurned in some matter, or what have you. We don't know that. There's not enough there to put that together, which leaves a lot of this, a whole bunch of gray area here that it's left for us to explore for ourselves, which it's just great stuff.
Yeah. It's like we always say about short stories. I mean, the best short stories respect the reader enough to kind of fill in a lot of the blanks of whatever they want themselves. You don't need to fill out every aspect of the story. You don't need to close every loop. You can just kind of throw it out there and give enough information that it can be read both ways, that it can be read differently or otherwise. It's sort of floating the idea, which is what the story absolutely does. There's no doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, that was an excellent exploration of a great story. Any final thoughts you guys have on this?
I mean, it hasn't changed my relationship with pigs, if that helps. It didn't make me more or likely predisposed to like pigs. I'm not a big fan. I mean, to provide nice meat, good meat, there's a lot of pig-like characteristics I like, but they're not actually involved in the living part of the animal. That makes me probably the biggest villain of this entire story. But
he was worried about becoming bacon.
Yeah.
That was a big fear, so a motivator.
So so here's a question. Isn't it implied that he's been in hiding for years? So is this the first porking season that he was around for? Or maybe it's the first time he got big enough to be killed. Okay.
Yeah. More questions.
I guess that's my closing thought. Why wasn't he afraid of becoming bacon sooner?
Well, I was going to say there's definitely a joke here about him not being cured bacon, but there you go.
All right. Okay. Well, bad dad jokes aside,
Yes.
we will wrap up this episode of Short Fiction Side Hustle. So everybody, thank you for joining us. Check out Chris's channel at the Chronicle of Chris. Check out Vash's channel at Reading by the Rainy Mountain. And check out pagechewing.com for all kinds of read-along stuff and information. And check out Speculative Speculations, our podcast that we do.
Yes.
And on sci-fi reading. And so be good to each other as well. Thank you.